Katherine Blackwell's hands trembled as she arranged the silverware on the church supper table, her mind replaying the news that had arrived just that morning. Her father's farm was 3 months behind on payments, and the banker was threatening foreclosure. At 22, she had never felt more alone in the bustling town of Cedar Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1878. The church hall buzzed with conversation and laughter as families filed in for the monthly community supper, a tradition that had continued uninterrupted for nearly a decade in their growing frontier town. Katherine kept her head down, focusing on her task while the other young women chatted excitedly about the cattle drive that had brought fresh faces to town. She had no interest in such matters, not with the weight of her family's troubles bearing down on her shoulders. "Is this seat taken?" a deep voice asked, cutting through her thoughts. Katherine looked up to find herself staring into the most startling blue eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and light brown hair that curled slightly at the edges of his Stetson. His clothes were trail-worn but clean clearly. He'd made an effort to be presentable for the church gathering. "No," she replied softly. "No one's sitting there." The stranger smiled, revealing a small dimple in his right cheek. "Then save me a place at your table, if you'd be so kind." Something about his gentle request made Katherine pause. Most cowboys passing through were loud and boisterous, but this man had a quietness about him that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "I'm Flynn Parker," he said, extending his hand. "Just rode in with the Moore outfit from Texas." Katherine hesitated before accepting his handshake. "Katherine Blackwell." "A pleasure, Miss Blackwell," Flynn said, taking the seat beside her. "I haven't been to a proper church supper in nearly 2 years. A man forgets how good it feels to sit at a table that isn't moving with the herd." Despite herself, Katherine felt a smile tugging at her lips. "The food here is certainly worth the stop. Mrs. Holloway's apple pie alone has convinced 3 traveling preachers to extend their stay in Cedar Creek." Flynn laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Then I'll be sure to save room." As the evening progressed, Katherine found herself relaxing in Flynn's company. He had a way of telling stories that made the miles of trail and endless sky come alive, but he also truly listened when she spoke. It was refreshing to talk to someone who didn't already know everything about her family's troubles. "You seem worried about something," Flynn observed quietly as they shared slices of the famous apple pie. "I hope I haven't been boring you with my tales." Katherine shook her head. "No, not at all. It's just family matters." Flynn nodded, not pressing further. Sometimes a stranger's ear is easier to talk to than family. No judgment, no history, just a moment of understanding between 2 people who happen to share a table. Katherine studied him, noticing the kindness in his eyes. "Our farm is in trouble," she admitted. "My father broke his leg badly last winter, and we've fallen behind. The bank sent notice today that we have 30 days to make good on our payments or lose everything." Flynn's expression grew serious. "I'm sorry to hear that. A farm is more than land, it's a home, a history." "Exactly," Katherine said, surprised at how easily he understood. "My grandfather built that house with his own hands. Every board has a story." As the church supper wound down, Katherine was surprised to find she'd spent the entire evening in Flynn's company. When he offered to walk her home, she accepted, ignoring the curious glances from the town gossips. Under the vast Wyoming sky dotted with stars, Flynn and Katherine walked slowly along the main street of Cedar Creek, their conversation flowing as naturally as the nearby river. Katherine learned that Flynn had been riding with cattle drives for 5 years, saving money to buy his own piece of land someday. "I've got my eye on a place in Colorado," he explained. "Good water rights, decent grazing. Another year or 2 of saving, and I might have enough for a down payment." "You'd leave the trail behind?" Katherine asked, genuinely curious. Most cowboys she'd met seemed addicted to the nomadic lifestyle. Flynn nodded. "The trail's no place to build a life. It's an adventure for a young man, but eventually, a person wants roots." He glanced at her. "I imagine that's something you understand, having grown up on a farm." "I do," Katherine admitted. "Though sometimes I wonder what it would be like to see all those places you've described, the canyons of Texas, the mountains of New Mexico Territory." They reached the edge of town where the road forked, one path leading to Katherine's family farm 2 miles outside of town, the other continuing with the cattle drive's camp. "I'd like to call on you tomorrow, if I may," Flynn said, his hat in his hands now. The herd will be resting for 2 days while Mr. Moore conducts business. Katherine hesitated, thinking of her father's reaction to a drifting cowboy showing interest in his daughter. But something about Flynn Parker made her nod. I'd like that. The next morning, Katherine was collecting eggs in the barn when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. Through the open doorway, she saw Flynn riding up on a handsome chestnut gelding. He'd replaced his trail clothes with a clean shirt and his best denims, and Katherine felt a flutter in her chest at the sight of him. "Good morning," he called, swinging down from his saddle with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback. "I hope I'm not intruding too early." "Not at all," Katherine replied, suddenly conscious of her work dress and apron. "We've been up since dawn." Flynn nodded understanding. "Farm hours. I grew up on one myself, back in Missouri." "You never mentioned that," Katherine said, surprised. A shadow crossed Flynn's face. "Lost it during the war. My father never came home, and my mother couldn't manage alone." He shrugged. "That's when I headed west." Before Katherine could respond, the farmhouse door opened and her father limped out, leaning heavily on his cane. James Blackwell was still a powerful-looking man despite his injury, with the same dark hair as Katherine, now streaked with gray. "And who might you be?" he called, his voice carrying the edge of paternal suspicion. Flynn stepped forward, extending his hand. "Flynn Parker, sir. I'm riding with the Moore outfit that came through yesterday." James Blackwell studied the young cowboy with narrowed eyes before accepting the handshake. "James Blackwell, I see you've met my daughter." "Yes, sir. At the church supper last night. I asked permission to call on her today." Katherine watched her father's expression soften slightly. At least Flynn had approached things properly, showing respect. "Katherine mentioned you broke your leg, Mr. Blackwell," Flynn continued. "I noticed your east field needs harvesting. I'd be happy to lend a hand while I'm in town." James looked surprised. A cowboy offering to harvest wheat? That's unusual. Flynn smiled. "Like I told Katherine, I grew up on a farm. I haven't forgotten how to use a scythe." That afternoon, Flynn shed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, working alongside Katherine's younger brother Thomas to bring in the wheat that should have been harvested weeks earlier. Katherine brought them water and watched in amazement as Flynn worked tirelessly, his movements efficient and practiced. "He really does know farming," her father remarked from his chair on the porch. "Most cowboys couldn't tell wheat from barley." "He's different," Katherine agreed softly. James gave his daughter a knowing look. "Just remember, Katie, he'll be moving on with that herd. Don't get your heart set on a man with wandering feet." Katherine nodded, but as she watched Flynn laugh at something Thomas said, she wondered if it was already too late for such warnings. When the sun began to set, Flynn finally stopped working. His shirt was soaked with sweat, and his hands were blistered, but he'd helped harvest nearly half the field. "Stay for supper," Katherine's mother insisted. "It's the least we can do." Around the Blackwell family table, Flynn fit in as if he'd always been there. He complimented Mrs. Blackwell's cooking, discussed cattle prices with James, and showed Thomas a rope trick that had the 14-year-old practicing until his mother ordered him to bed. As Flynn prepared to leave, Katherine walked him to his horse. "Thank you for today," she said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." Flynn adjusted his saddle. "I wanted to. Your family reminds me of mine before." He trailed off, looking into the distance. Besides, it felt good to work the land again. Different from pushing cattle. "Will I see you tomorrow?" Katherine asked, hoping her voice didn't betray her eagerness. Flynn smiled. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away, but I should warn you the herd moves out the day after. Mr. Moore wants to reach Cheyenne before the first snow." Katherine felt her heart sink. Just as quickly as Flynn had entered her life, he would be gone again, back to the endless trail and distant horizons. "I understand," she said, trying to keep her disappointment from showing. Flynn stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "Katherine, I know we've only just met, but I feel like I've known you much longer. There's something special here, something I haven't felt before." Before she could respond, Flynn leaned down and gently kissed her cheek, his lips warm against her skin. "Good night, Katherine Blackwell. Sweet dreams." As he rode away into the darkness, Katherine touched her cheek, wondering how a man she'd known for just 2 days could leave such an impression on her heart. The next morning brought unexpected news. The cattle drive would be delayed for at least a week due to business complications. Mr. Moore had encountered problems with the cattle buyer in Cedar Creek, and was negotiating a new deal. Flynn arrived at the Blackwell farm with the sunrise, ready to help with more harvesting. This time, James Blackwell joined them, supervising from his chair as Flynn, Thomas, and Katherine worked together to bring in the remaining wheat. "You've got a good technique," James commented as he watched Flynn work. "Most men these days don't know how to cut wheat properly." Flynn paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "My father was particular about it. Said a clean cut at the right height meant better yield next season." "Smart man," James nodded appreciatively. As the week progressed, Flynn became a daily fixture at the Blackwell farm. He helped repair the leaking roof on the barn, mended fences, and even assisted Katherine's mother with chopping winter firewood. Each evening, he would sit with the family, sharing stories of his travels while carefully omitting the rowdier aspects of trail life. And each night, when he walked Katherine to the edge of the farmyard before departing, their conversations grew deeper, their connection stronger. On the third night, he held her hand. On the fourth, he kissed her properly under the light of the waxing moon. "I never expected to find you," Flynn whispered against her hair. "I wasn't looking for anything except the next paycheck, the next mile of trail." Katherine leaned against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "And now I'm wondering if all those miles were just leading me here." On the sixth day, Mr. Moore himself rode out to the Blackwell farm, looking for his missing cowhand. He was a stout man with a thick mustache and shrewd eyes that took in the scene before him. Flynn helping the Blackwells stack the last of the harvested wheat. "Parker," he called. "I've been wondering where you disappeared to. The boys said you'd found yourself a pretty reason to desert your post." Flynn straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. "No desertion, sir. Just helping out during our downtime." He made introductions, and Mr. Moore tipped his hat to Katherine and her parents. "Well, I came to tell you we're moving out tomorrow at first light. Deal's done, and we need to get this herd to Cheyenne before the weather turns." Katherine felt her heart drop into her stomach. Just one more day, and Flynn would be gone. Mr. Moore turned to leave, but paused. "Oh, and that business we discussed in Texas, I've been thinking on it. If you're still interested, come see me tonight. Might have a proposition for you." After the cattle baron left, Flynn seemed distracted. When Katherine asked what Mr. Moore had meant, he shook his head. "Just business talk. Nothing important." That evening, instead of staying for supper, Flynn excused himself. "I need to speak with Mr. Moore before we leave tomorrow, but I'll come by in the morning to say goodbye properly." Katherine nodded, fighting back tears. "I understand." Flynn cupped her face in his calloused hands. "Katherine Blackwell, meeting you has changed everything for me. I need you to know that." Then he was gone, riding toward town in the gathering dusk, leaving Katherine to wonder what might have been if they'd had more time. Sleep eluded Katherine that night. She tossed and turned, thinking of Flynn riding away with the cattle drive, perhaps never to return to Cedar Creek. By dawn, she had made up her mind to see him off, to watch the dust of the cattle drive disappear over the horizon and carry her heart with it. She dressed quickly and slipped out of the house, borrowing her father's horse to ride into town. The main street was already bustling with activity as cowboys prepared for departure, checking saddles and loading supplies. Katherine spotted Flynn near the general store, deep in conversation with Mr. Moore. Something about their serious expressions made her hang back, unwilling to interrupt what seemed like an important discussion. Finally, they shook hands firmly, and Mr. Moore clapped Flynn on the shoulder before walking away. Flynn stood for a moment, staring at a piece of paper in his hand, before folding it carefully and tucking it into his shirt pocket. Katherine urged her horse forward. "Flynn." He turned, surprise lighting his features. "Katherine, I was just about to ride out to see you." She dismounted, tying her horse to the hitching post. "I couldn't wait. I needed to see you before you left." Flynn took her hands in his. "I'm glad you came. There's something I need to tell you." His serious tone made Katherine's heart constrict. "What is it?" "Mr. Moore has been grooming me for more responsibility. Last night, he offered me a position as his foreman at his ranch in Wyoming, just 50 miles from here." Katherine stared at him, scarcely daring to believe what she was hearing. "You're not leaving with the drive?" Flynn shook his head, a slow smile spreading across his face. "No, I'm staying in Wyoming. The position comes with a small cabin and good pay enough that I could start building a life here." Joy bubbled up inside Katherine, but she tempered it with caution. "What about your dream of land in Colorado?" "Dreams change," Flynn said simply. Sometimes they get better. He paused, taking a deep breath. Katherine, I know this is sudden. We've known each other just a week. But in that week, I felt more at home than I have in years of wandering. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the paper Mr. Moore had given him. This is the contract for the foreman position. I haven't signed it yet because I wanted to ask you something first. Katherine's heart pounded as Flynn continued. I'm asking if you'd consider a future with me. Not right away, I know your family needs you, and we both need time. But if I stay, if I work hard and prove myself worthy of you, would you consider building that future together? Could you love a former cowboy trying to put down roots? Tears filled Katherine's eyes. Flynn Parker, I think I already do. His face lit up with hope. Then I'll sign this contract. I'll work for Mr. Moore and come courting properly, with your father's permission. And maybe, when the time is right. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Katherine could see the promise in his eyes. 2 weeks later, Flynn moved into the foreman's cabin on the Moore Ranch. True to his word, he asked James Blackwell's permission to court Katherine formally. And though her father was initially skeptical of the former drifter, Flynn's work ethic and honest character gradually won him over. Flynn visited the Blackwell farm every Sunday after church, often staying for dinner and helping with whatever tasks needed attention. On his rare days off from the ranch, he would arrive with tools and materials, slowly helping the Blackwells make repairs they hadn't been able to afford. When the bank threatened foreclosure again, Flynn approached Mr. Moore with a proposal. He offered his first 6 months' wages as security against a loan for the Blackwell farm. Impressed by his foreman's integrity, Mr. Moore went one step further. He purchased the Blackwell mortgage outright from the bank, offering James far more reasonable terms for repayment. Consider it an investment in good neighbors, Mr. Moore told James, and in my foreman's future happiness. By Christmas of 1878, Flynn had become a fixture in the Blackwell home. The former cowboy who had once asked for a place at Katherine's table now had a permanent seat at family gatherings, holiday celebrations, and quiet evening meals. On Christmas Eve, after the family had exchanged modest gifts and Thomas had gone to bed, Flynn asked Katherine to step outside. The night was clear and cold, stars shining brilliantly over the snow-covered landscape. I have one more gift, Flynn said, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. I've been saving for this since the day I decided to stay. Inside the box was a simple gold band with a small pearl. It's not fancy, Flynn apologized, but it's honest, like what I feel for you. Katherine's eyes filled with tears as Flynn dropped to one knee in the snow. Katherine Blackwell, when I asked you to save me a place at your table, I never imagined you would save a place in your heart as well. Will you marry me and make a wandering cowboy the happiest man in Wyoming Territory? Yes, Katherine whispered, pulling him to his feet. Yes, Flynn Parker, I will. They were married in the spring of 1879, in the same church where they had first met. The entire town of Cedar Creek attended, along with Mr. Moore and several cowboys from the ranch who had become Flynn's friends. After the ceremony, Katherine's father surprised them with a gift: 5 acres of Blackwell land, adjacent to the family farm. For your future, James said, pressing the deed into Flynn's hand. A place to build your own stories. That summer, with help from the community, Flynn built a small house on their land, just 2 rooms to start, but with careful design that would allow for expansion as their family grew. Katherine planted a garden, and Flynn built a chicken coop, taking the first steps toward creating their own farm alongside his work at the Moore Ranch. Life wasn't always easy. Wyoming winters were harsh, and there were times when money was tight. But the couple faced each challenge together, their bond growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. 2 years after their wedding, Katherine gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Emma, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's dark hair. Flynn proved to be a devoted father, often carrying the baby with him as he did chores around their small homestead. On Emma's first birthday, the family gathered at the Blackwell farm for a celebration. As Katherine watched Flynn swing their daughter high in the air, her giggles filling the summer evening, she thought back to that church supper 3 years earlier. What are you smiling about? Flynn asked, joining her on the porch with Emma now asleep against his shoulder. I was just remembering the night we met, Katherine replied. You asking me to save you a place at my table. Flynn grinned. that same dimple appearing in his cheek. Best words I ever spoke. Do you ever miss it? Katherine asked. The trail, the open country, the freedom? Flynn looked out over their land, the garden thriving, the new barn rising behind their little house, the future they were building day by day. Not for a second, he said, wrapping his free arm around her. I thought I was searching for land, for a place to call my own. Turns out I was looking for a home. And I found it, Katherine, not in a piece of property, but in you. As the years passed, their family and their farm grew together. Flynn eventually left his position at the Moore Ranch to work their land full-time. They added 2 more children, a boy and another girl, and Flynn built additions to their house with each new arrival. By 1890, the Parker farm had become one of the most prosperous in Cedar Creek. Flynn and Katherine worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word. Their eldest daughter was preparing for college in Denver, something neither Flynn nor Katherine had dreamed possible for their children. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Flynn surprised Katherine by taking her to the church hall where they had first met. He had arranged a private supper, with the table set exactly as it had been that night in 1878. What's all this? Katherine asked, touching the carefully arranged place settings. Flynn pulled out her chair. I thought it was time to thank you properly. For what? For saving me a place, he said simply. At your table, in your life, in your heart. Katherine smiled at the man who had once been a wandering cowboy and was now the center of her world. It turns out we saved each other. Under the same roof where a lonely young woman and a drifting cowboy had first shared a meal, Flynn and Katherine Parker renewed their promises to each other, their love deeper and richer for the years they had traveled together. And when they returned home that night to their farm, to the house they had built, the land they had nurtured, and the family they had created, they knew with absolute certainty that they had found what so many spend a lifetime seeking, a place to belong, completely and forever, to each other.